I'm Teresa Caraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Today, I'm going to be responding to Russell Brand's interview of Vandana Shiva called Fearlessness and Fighting Power. I love Vandana Shiva. She is my candidate for Spirit Mother Earth Goddess, as Russell calls her. I also love her remark that Western pants are a prison and that the sari is yards and yards of material that a woman can just expand into infinitely. Lately, when I meditate, when I close my eyes, I have floaters that I've been imagining as the eyes of Ganesh. And having the benevolent, playful elephant deity staring back at me has so enhanced my meditation. There is something about that non-judgmental spirit that makes him my candidate for the divine father figure. I think they would make a lovely couple. So this episode I'm calling Patriarchal Pyramid or Matriarchal Matrix, because I think that we're at the tipping point of 100 generations of patriarchy. And the questions that I'm asking is, how do we get out of that? What comes after? So when I looked at the matriarchal matrix, someone told me that the word matrix means uterus or womb, that it's the place in which things develop. It's the mold that gives the form to something, the shape of what's to come. It also means the array of possible truth values, which I think is really interesting. Mother wit is considered common sense. So looking at the matrix, I think doesn't have to be what it's been in science fiction. I think the matrix is grassroots networking that is bringing the best of what can come out of any different area and stealing it and putting it together. So having a system in which we can admit that we've made mistakes and pull together other people's ideas and change our minds, I think is something that we need to model in order to get out of that patriarchal system and move into one that is more matriarchal and matrixed. I think it's indicative that when I talk about Vandana Shiva, I have to clarify that she is Indian dot not feather, as the saying goes. What is up with the fact that for 500 years we have been calling two continents of people by the wrong name rather than admit that a man should have asked for directions? If it's taken us 500 years to be able to say that Columbus went the wrong direction, then how are we going to say that our entire economy is based on the wrong ideas, the wrong purpose, the wrong goal? What is fearlessness? Vandana talks about how fearlessness needs to be cultivated, needs to be practiced every day. In A Course in Miracles, which I've studied for 18 years, it says that the opposite of love isn't hate. The opposite of love is fear. There's only love and the call for love. I look at fear as being part of the unholy trinity: fear, blame, and guilt. And all three of those, I think, always go together. They always lead to one another. So now we're living in an era in which we've been taught that fear equals love, that if we love people, we won't go near them because we're afraid that if we go near them, if we touch them, we're going to kill them. That's the kind of guilt that's been laid on us. So what about fighting power? When I think of fighting power, I think of another powerful Indian woman, Arundhati Roy, who I hope Russell someday interviews. I write about Arundhati Roy in my book, How to Dismantle an Empire. She became famous for her first novel, The God of Small Things, which won the Booker Prize. Then she used her platform to become an outspoken advocate for the oppressed in India. And She has another book called Walking with the Comrades, where she goes into the forest with the Naxalites or the Maoists, who are like the Zapatistas for India. They are the armed militia movement that defends the villages and defends their local sovereignty and their food. One of the things that she says is that if you have the star power of Gandhi, nonviolence is a tactic that can work because you need an international audience. But if you're out in the forest where anything could happen and no one would know, you need to be able to defend yourself. So they are two hands of, I believe, the same body. I write about how the 1.3 billion people in India are really too many to be one country. I look at maybe 300,000 as being a good size for what I call a commonwealth. If we had that, India would be 4,000 different commonwealths. Of those 1.3 billion, a third of them are under 16. So there is a very active, creative movement that is looking for change. They are very outspoken in India about what their intention is. There's something called Operation Green Hunt, which has as its intention, its stated intention, to move 85% of all of the rural peasants into cities and off the land so that they don't interfere with these MOUs, the memorandums of understanding that they have with the mining companies. In my book, I quote the Prime Minister who says, "If left-wing extremism continues to flourish in important parts of our country, which have tremendous natural resources of minerals and other precious things, that will certainly affect the climate for investment." But a Planning Commission report said that even though the Maoist movement had a long-term ideology of capturing state power by force, in its day-to-day manifestations, it was a fight for social justice, equality, protection, security, and local development. Arundhati Roy writes, "The Maoist guerrilla army is made up almost entirely of desperately poor tribal people living in conditions of such chronic hunger that it verges on famine of the kind we only associate with sub-Saharan Africa. They are people who, even after 60 years of India's so-called independence, have not had access to education, health care, or legal redress. They are people who have been mercilessly exploited for decades, consistently cheated by small businessmen and moneylenders, the women raped as a matter of right by police and forest department personnel. Their journey back to a semblance of dignity is due in large part to the Maoist cadre who have lived and worked and fought by their sides for decades." So when we look at how to take back power and how to have that fearlessness, I think we need to be standing up for those kinds of movements, those armed guerrilla movements that are protecting the people in places where there is no press, there is no Gandhi to bring international celebrity to these causes. I'd like to end by telling you about a dream that I had, which is unusual that I remember any of them. It started out as a nightmare. I was being chased by this huge, furry King Kong that was red. And I was running and I kept running up this mountain and I got to the peak and all of a sudden this winged green dragon emerged. So I'm backing up from both of them and I bump into something that says, "Excuse me, is it time to start the meeting? Enter the conversation willing to change your mind." So that is Thich Nhat Hanh saying that in a true dialogue, both sides are willing to change. It's also the first step in a problem-solving protocol that I developed called Enabled. So then I realized that I'm actually reading a book, and I turn to the last page, and it's upside down. So I need to flip it, and from there, the story starts and solves the problem going back to the beginning on the opposite pages. And the green dragon and King Kong sit down and have tea and start this process of figuring out how to solve climate change. And so while my subconscious is clearly having fun with these archetypes, I think there's a truth that these forces that we see arrayed against us can change in the blink of an eye, and that nature is on our side. So I want to thank Vandana Shiva for giving me hope. And I will be talking more about India when I do an episode on pandemic against the rich from the person whose name must not be mentioned, and talking about the war on cash and how India was forced to be a cashless society. If you enjoyed this, here's another one along the same lines, and here's a playlist that has several that look at global inequality. And I would love it if you would subscribe. Thank you.